Ashwood, Pennsylvania, was a town held together by the past. Its old buildings, narrow streets, and towering oaks had weathered generations of stories, secrets, and ghosts. Everyone who lived there felt the weight of history pressing down on them, whether they acknowledged it or not. Ashwood's roots ran deep, and the woods surrounding the town had always been a source of mystery. Dark and thick with trees, the forest seemed to hold its own set of rules, a place where time didn't quite work the way it should. Matt and Tyler had grown up here, in the shadow of those woods. They'd spent their childhood exploring them, looking for anything that might stir their imaginations. When they were younger, they had built forts out of sticks, pretended to be adventurers, and mapped out the dense thickets, knowing they were never more than a few minutes from safety. But as they grew older, their sense of adventure shifted. The woods became less a playground and more a mystery, especially when they first heard about the Hollow House. Tyler had been the one to bring it up years ago, when they were just kids. It was one of those stories passed down from older kids to younger ones, whispered on the playground or during sleepovers when the lights were out. The Hollow House was the kind of legend that felt larger than life. A house deep in the woods that no one dared visit. Rumors of gruesome deaths, strange symbols, and whispers in the dark surrounded the house, making it irresistible to the curious but terrifying to the cautious. As they got older, Matt and Tyler made a habit of exploring places like the Hollow House, abandoned barns, old warehouses, forgotten corners of the forest where the air felt thicker. But none of those places ever lived up to the stories. Until that cold October night. They were both seniors in high school now, and the restless energy of adolescence had given way to a more reckless desire for real adventure. The stories about the Hollow House had always loomed large, and with graduation looming ahead, they wanted one last unforgettable experience before life dragged them into adulthood. It was Tyler who had finally pushed for it, though Matt had been hesitant. The stories were just that, stories, but something about the Hollow House felt different, darker. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Matt muttered, gripping the steering wheel of his beat-up Jeep as they drove toward the edge of town. The road leading out to the woods was barely more than a strip of cracked asphalt, disappearing into a fog that clung to the trees like a living thing. "You sure about this, man?" Tyler, sitting in the passenger seat, was unusually quiet. His hands were fidgeting with the flashlight he'd brought, but his face was set with determination. "We've talked about it forever. If we don't do it now, we'll never get the chance again. And think about it. If we don't go, someone else will, and we'll never know if the stories are true." Matt sighed. He had always been the more practical one, the one who kept Tyler from getting them into real trouble. But something about tonight felt inevitable. They had reached the point of no return. They drove in silence for a few more minutes, the road narrowing as the trees thickened around them. The fog made it hard to see, and the occasional flicker of headlights through the mist cast ghostly shadows on the trees. The woods felt different tonight, darker, colder, as if the forest itself knew where they were going and was warning them to turn back. But Matt kept driving. It wasn't long before the road ended. They parked the Jeep at the edge of an overgrown path that led into the forest. The rest of the journey would be on foot, and Matt felt a knot tightening in his stomach as they stepped out into the cold night air. The trees loomed above them, their branches bare and twisted like skeletal arms reaching for the sky. "This is it," Tyler said quietly, adjusting his backpack as he stared down the path. The light from his flashlight barely penetrated the fog, casting long shadows on the ground. "We just follow the trail for a mile or so, and then we'll hit the clearing. That's where the house is." Matt nodded, pulling his jacket tighter around him. The chill in the air was unnatural, biting through his clothes and settling into his bones. As they started walking, the fog seemed to close in around them, muffling the sound of their footsteps and turning the world beyond the trees into a shapeless blur. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, until the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath their boots. "Feels like we're walking into a horror movie," Matt joked, though his voice lacked the usual humor. "You sure this is a good idea?" Tyler glanced over at him, his expression unreadable. "Come on, man. We've been to worse places. It's just an old house. We'll take some pictures, maybe explore a bit, and then we're out of here. What's the worst that could happen?" Matt didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the path ahead, but something was gnawing at the back of his mind. The air felt heavy, and the woods seemed too quiet, too still. Every instinct in his body was telling him to turn back, but he didn't. They had come this far, and he wasn't about to let Tyler down. As they walked deeper into the woods, the trees began to thin out, and the fog lifted slightly. Ahead, the outline of the house began to take shape. Even through the haze, Matt could tell it was massive, far larger than he'd imagined. The once grand Victorian mansion was now a decaying ruin, its windows shattered and its roof sagging under the weight of time. Vines had crept up the walls, strangling the life out of what remained of the house's former glory. The air grew colder as they approached, and a feeling of dread settled over Matt like a weight on his chest. "This is it," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. He stopped at the edge of the clearing, staring up at the house with a mixture of awe and fear. "We're really here." Matt swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Yeah," he said, though the word felt hollow. The house seemed to loom over them, a dark, decaying monument to something long forgotten. They stood there for a moment, neither of them moving, the oppressive silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. The house had a presence, an aura that made the air feel thick, suffocating. It was as if the house was watching them, waiting for them to make the first move. Tyler took a deep breath and started forward, his footsteps crunching on the dead grass. Matt followed reluctantly, his heart pounding in his chest. The closer they got, the more wrong the house felt. There was something unnatural about it, something that didn't belong. They reached the front porch, and Tyler hesitated, staring at the door that hung crooked on its rusted hinges. "You ready?" he asked, his voice shaky but determined. Matt nodded, though his body screamed at him to turn around and run. "Yeah, let's do this." Tyler pushed the door open, and the sound of creaking would echoed through the empty halls. The air inside was colder than outside, and the smell of damp rot hit them like a wall. Their flashlights flickered as they stepped inside, casting long shadows along the decaying walls. The floorboards groaned under their weight, and every step felt like it could send them crashing through the floor. The foyer was massive, with high ceilings and a grand staircase that led to the second floor. But it was clear the house had been abandoned for a long time. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the furniture was rotting, reduced to nothing but piles of wood and fabric. Dust hung in the air, thick and heavy, swirling in the beams of their flashlights. "This place is a wreck," Matt muttered, glancing around. "Hard to believe anyone ever lived here." Tyler nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. He was staring at the walls, where strange symbols had been carved into the wood. They were intricate, spiraling patterns that seemed to twist and writhe the longer Matt stared at them. "What the hell are those?" Matt asked, shining his flashlight on the symbols. "I don't know," Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But they look old. Really old." Matt shivered, pulling his jacket tighter around him. The house felt wrong, like it was alive, like it was watching them. He wanted to leave, but Tyler seemed transfixed by the symbols. "We should go," Matt said, glancing around nervously. "This place gives me the creeps." Tyler didn't respond. He was still staring at the symbols, his flashlight tracing the patterns along the walls. "There's something about these," he muttered, his voice distant. "They feel familiar." Matt frowned. "Familiar? What are you talking about?" But before Tyler could answer, a sound echoed through the house, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like the wind moving through the cracks in the walls. Matt froze, his heart pounding in his chest. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, turning his flashlight toward the darkened hallway at the far end of the foyer. Tyler nodded, his face pale. "Yeah." The whisper came again, louder this time, more distinct. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice coming from somewhere deep within the house. "Let's get out of here," Matt said, his voice shaking. But Tyler didn't move. He was staring down the hallway, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. "Tyler, come on," Matt urged, grabbing his friend's arm. But Tyler didn't budge. The whispering grew louder, closer, and then, from the shadows at the end of the hallway, something moved. A figure, tall, gaunt, with long limbs that seemed to stretch impossibly far, emerged from the darkness. Matt's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Its face was featureless, a blank, pale mask, and its body moved with a twisted, jerky grace. "Run!" Matt shouted, but Tyler didn't move. He stood frozen, his eyes locked on the creature. The thing tilted its head, as if considering them, and then it lunged. Matt grabbed Tyler's arm and pulled, but it was too late. The creature's long fingers wrapped around Tyler's throat, lifting him off the ground. Tyler's eyes widened in terror, but no sound escaped his lips. "Tyler!" Matt screamed, but the creature didn't release its grip. Instead, its body began to shift, its skin stretching and twisting as it pressed itself against Tyler's body. And then, in a horrifying, grotesque transformation, the creature became Tyler. Matt stumbled backward, his heart hammering in his chest. The thing now looked exactly like his friend, wearing his skin like a suit. But it wasn't Tyler. The eyes were wrong, dark, hollow, filled with a hunger that made Matt's blood run cold. The thing smiled, its lips stretching too wide across its face. "Matt," it said in Tyler's voice, but the tone was off, warped, distorted, like a broken record. "Come back." Matt turned and ran. He didn't stop. He couldn't. The thing wearing Tyler's skin followed him, its footsteps slow but deliberate, echoing through the empty house. Every instinct in Matt's body screamed at him to get out, to escape. But the house seemed to twist and turn around him, the hallways stretching into darkness. He burst through the front door and into the night, the cold air burning his lungs. But he didn't stop. He ran through the fog-covered woods, the branches tearing at his clothes, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind him, the thing followed, its footsteps steady, relentless. Matt's mind raced, trying to make sense of what had happened. Tyler was dead. That thing had taken him, worn him like a mask, and now it was coming for him. Just when he thought he couldn't run any longer, he saw the road ahead. Salvation. He sprinted toward it, his legs burning with exhaustion. But as he reached the edge of the forest, something grabbed his ankle, pulling him down. He hit the ground hard, his head spinning. The thing loomed over him now, its face still wearing that grotesque version of Tyler's features. It leaned down, and Matt could see its eyes, dark, hollow, and filled with hunger. But then, in the distance, there was a sound. A car engine. Someone was coming. The thing hesitated, its head snapping toward the road. For a brief moment, its grip loosened, and Matt seized the opportunity. He kicked out with all his strength, knocking the creature back, and scrambled to his feet. He didn't look back as he stumbled onto the road, waving his arms frantically at the approaching headlights. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, a man in his late 40s, jumped out. "Kid, are you okay?" Matt could barely form the words. "My friend, Tyler, he's..." But as he turned to point toward the woods, there was nothing. No sign of the creature. No sign of Tyler. Just the dark, silent forest behind him. The man grabbed Matt by the shoulders. "What happened?" Matt shook his head, his mind still reeling. "He's gone," he whispered. "It took him." The driver looked at him, confused, but didn't press for details. He helped Matt into the car and drove him back to town, where Matt would try to explain what had happened. But deep down, he knew no one would believe him. No one would understand, because the Hollow House had taken Tyler. And whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished. It was still out there, in the woods, waiting, and it would come again. After Matt's first encounter, the world became smaller. The once familiar streets of Ashwood felt like a different planet, populated by people who couldn't understand, who didn't believe. Days passed, and the police failed to find any sign of Tyler. His parents were devastated, and rumors swirled through town, with whispers questioning Matt's involvement. Matt knew the truth. He had seen it with his own eyes. That thing in the Hollow House had taken Tyler. But no one would ever believe him. They wouldn't believe that something unnatural was lurking in the woods, wearing the skin of its victims. And now, it haunted Matt every night. Tyler's face, the distorted version of him, haunted his dreams, calling to him with that eerie, broken voice. The guilt gnawed at him like a disease. How could he have left his best friend behind? The thought tortured him every waking moment. It wasn't long before Matt knew what he had to do. He had to go back, to face whatever was in that house and finish what had begun that terrible night. It was nearly a week after the incident when Matt found himself standing once again at the edge of the forest. He had told no one. He couldn't. He knew the risk, but the pull to return was too strong, the need for answers too great. Armed with a flashlight, a hunting knife, and a backpack of supplies, he ventured back into the woods. The forest was just as oppressive as before. The trees seemed to crowd around him, their branches twisting like claws. The fog rolled in thick, just like that night, muffling the world around him. Every sound was amplified in the eerie silence. The crunch of his footsteps on dead leaves, the rustle of the wind through the trees. It wasn't long before the hollow house loomed into view, its dark silhouette rising from the fog like a decaying corpse. The air was colder here, as if the house itself radiated death. The sight of it sent a shiver down Matt's spine, but he pressed forward. He reached the front door, and this time, he didn't hesitate. The door creaked open, and the smell of rot and decay hit him like a wave. Inside, the house was just as he remembered, silent, suffocating, with shadows that seemed to move just at the edge of his vision. But Matt wasn't the same terrified boy who had fled that night. He was here for a reason. "Tyler!" he shouted into the darkness, his voice echoing off the walls. "I'm here. Show yourself." The silence was deafening, and then, faint at first, but growing louder, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Matt gripped the handle of his knife, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what was coming. He had seen it before. From the shadows, a figure emerged, tall, gaunt, its limbs too long, its movements too jerky. It wore Tyler's face, but that smile, that horrible, too wide grin, gave it away. It wasn't Tyler. It was never Tyler. "Matt," the creature said in that twisted, broken version of Tyler's voice. "You came back." Matt's hand tightened around the knife, but his legs felt like they were made of lead. The creature took a step toward him, its dark eyes gleaming with hunger. "I'm still here, Matt," it said, its voice warping as it moved closer. "You left me. You left me behind." Matt's mind screamed at him to run, but this time, he wouldn't. He couldn't. He had to end this. "You're not him," Matt shouted, taking a step back, his flashlight trembling in his hand. "You're not Tyler." The thing smiled wider, its face stretching in ways no human face should. "Aren't I?" it asked, tilting its head. "I wear him, don't I?" And then, faster than Matt could react, it lunged. Matt swung the knife wildly, but the creature was too quick. It knocked him to the ground, its long fingers wrapping around his throat. Matt struggled, gasping for air as the thing's cold, clammy skin pressed against his own. But then, in a moment of clarity, Matt remembered the symbols, the strange, spiraling patterns carved into the walls of the house. He didn't know what they meant, but he knew they were important. He had seen them in every room, as if they were part of some ritual, some way to control the evil that lived here. With a desperate burst of strength, Matt reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of chalk he had brought with him, just in case. He slashed at the creature's hand with his knife, causing it to recoil for just a moment, and scrambled to his feet. He ran to the nearest wall and started drawing the symbols he had memorized. The creature hesitated, its head tilting as if confused. It took a step forward, then another, but as Matt completed the pattern, the air in the room seemed to shift. The walls groaned, and the creature let out a screech, a horrible, ear-piercing sound that echoed through the house. The thing lunged at Matt, but it stopped just short of the symbol he had drawn. Its body convulsed, its limbs twisting and bending in unnatural ways. It howled in pain, thrashing against the invisible barrier the symbol had created. Matt watched in horror as the creature's form began to unravel. The face it wore, the face of his best friend, melted away, revealing something far more monstrous beneath. Its skin sloughed off, revealing a mass of black, writhing tendrils. Its body twisted and buckled, as if being pulled apart from the inside. And then, with one final, guttural screech, it collapsed into a heap of darkness, dissolving into nothingness. For a long moment, Matt just stood there, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his hands shaking. It was over. Whatever that thing had been, it was gone. He had done it, but the house was still there, its oppressive presence weighing down on him. He knew, deep down, that this place wasn't finished. The evil that had lived here for so long wasn't gone. It was just dormant, waiting, and it would call to someone else, eventually. Matt left the house that night, knowing he would never return. He had survived, but Tyler was gone, and the hollow house would forever haunt his dreams. But at least now, the thing that had taken Tyler was gone, or so he hoped.